The first thing he felt was pain, sharp, throbbing, and everywhere. His body felt heavy, like it was pinned under a mountain. Slowly, he opened his eyes, blinking against the harsh, unfamiliar light. The ceiling above him was unlike anything he had ever seen. It shimmered with a soft, golden glow, and strange symbols floated across its surface like living shadows. Where was he? The last thing he remembered was the crash. His ship had been caught in a violent asteroid storm, and he had barely managed to eject before it exploded. After that, everything was a blur. He must have been rescued, but by whom? And where? He tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness forced him back down. That's when he noticed her. She was standing at the foot of his bed, watching him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. At first glance, she looked almost human, tall, slender, with smooth, pale skin. But her eyes, they were unlike anything he had ever seen. They glowed a faint blue, like twin stars in the night sky, and they seemed to pierce right through him. "You're awake," she said, her voice soft but oddly mechanical, as if it were being filtered through some kind of translator. "Do not move. Your body is still healing." He opened his mouth to speak, but his throat was dry, and all that came out was a hoarse croak. She stepped closer, holding a strange device in her hand. It looked like a cross between a syringe and a crystal, and it pulsed with a faint, rhythmic light. "Drink this," she said, pressing the device to his lips. A cool, sweet liquid flowed into his mouth, soothing his parched throat almost instantly. He felt a surge of energy, and the pain in his body began to fade. "Who are you?" he managed to ask, his voice still weak. "I am your nurse," she replied simply. "You are in a medical facility on my homeworld. You were badly injured when we found you. Your ship, it did not survive." He felt a pang of grief at the mention of his ship. It had been his home for years, his only companion in the vast emptiness of space. But he pushed the feeling aside. He was alive, and that was what mattered. "Thank you," he said, looking up at her. "For saving me." She nodded but said nothing. Her glowing eyes never left his face, and there was something unsettling about the way she stared at him. It wasn't just curiosity, it was something deeper, something primal. Before he could say anything else, she suddenly stiffened. Her eyes flickered, the blue glow intensifying for a moment before fading back to normal. She took a step back, her hands trembling. "Are you okay?" he asked, concerned. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned away from him, her body shaking violently. He could hear her breathing heavily, as if she were struggling to control herself. Then, without warning, she let out a low, guttural sound, a sound that sent chills down his spine. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice rising in panic. She turned back to him, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Her eyes were no longer calm and focused. They were wild, filled with a hunger he couldn't understand. Her lips parted, revealing sharp, glistening teeth, and she let out another guttural growl. He tried to move, to get away from her, but his body was still too weak. She lunged at him, her hands gripping the sides of his bed. For a moment, he thought she was going to attack him, but then she stopped, her face inches from his. I can't control it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The frenzy, it's too strong." "What frenzy?" he asked, his heart pounding in his chest. But she didn't answer. Instead, she let out a strangled cry and stumbled back, collapsing to the floor. Her body convulsed, and she curled into a ball, clutching her head as if in agony. He didn't know what to do. He wanted to help her, but he was too weak, too confused. All he could do was watch as she writhed on the floor, her glowing eyes flickering like a dying flame. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. She went still, her breathing slow and steady. After a moment, she sat up, her eyes calm and focused once more. "I'm sorry," she said softly, avoiding his gaze. I didn't mean to frighten you. What was that? He asked, his voice shaking. She hesitated, then looked at him with a mixture of sadness and fear. It's called the mating frenzy, she said. It's something my kind goes through. But it's never been this strong before. I don't know why it's happening now. He didn't know what to say. All he knew was that he was in a strange place, surrounded by beings he didn't understand, and that something very, very strange was happening. And he had a feeling it was only the beginning. The explorer lay in his bed, staring at the shimmering ceiling. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. The nurse, his nurse, had called it a mating frenzy. What did that even mean? And why had it affected her so strongly? He had so many questions, but she had left the room abruptly after her episode, leaving him alone with his thoughts. A few hours later, she returned. She looked calm now, her glowing eyes steady and focused. She carried a tray with what looked like food, strange, colorful fruits and a steaming bowl of something that smelled both sweet and savory. You need to eat, she said, placing the tray on a small table beside his bed. Your body requires nutrients to heal. He nodded, still feeling a bit uneasy around her. But his stomach growled loudly, reminding him that he hadn't eaten in who knows how long. He reached for one of the fruits, its skin smooth and cool to the touch. It tasted like nothing he had ever experienced, a mix of citrus and honey, with a hint of something spicy. This is amazing, he said, taking another bite. What is it? It's called a lumine fruit, she replied. It grows only on this planet. It's rich in vitamins and minerals that your body needs. He nodded, still chewing. Thank you. For everything. I don't even know your name. She hesitated for a moment, then said, You may call me Nara. Nara, he repeated. Well, I guess you already know my name, since you found me in my ship. She shook her head. We found no identification on you. Your ship was too damaged. We only knew you were alive because of your life signs. Oh, he said, surprised. Well, my name is, let's just call me John for now. John, she said, testing the name. It suits you. He smiled faintly, feeling a bit more at ease. So, Nara, where exactly am I? What is this place? You are on the planet Zorith, she said. It is one of the oldest inhabited worlds in this galaxy. My people, the Zorathians, have lived here for millions of years. Zorith, he repeated, trying to wrap his mind around it. I've never heard of it. But then again, I was way off course when my ship crashed. I must have drifted into uncharted space. That is likely, she said. Our planet is hidden from most of the universe. We prefer to keep it that way. Why? He asked, curious. She looked away, her glowing eyes dimming slightly. Our ways are different. Many would not understand us. And some would seek to exploit us. He nodded, sensing that there was more to it than she was letting on. But he didn't push. Instead, he asked, Can you tell me more about your people? About the mating frenzy? Her expression darkened at the mention of it. It is a rare condition, she said slowly. It happens only once in a lifetime, when a Zorathian reaches a certain age. It is a time of great vulnerability and transformation. But it is also dangerous. If not controlled, it can lead to madness, or worse. Is there a cure? He asked. She shook her head. Not a cure, exactly. But there are ways to manage it. Ancient rituals, passed down through generations. But lately, something has changed. The frenzy has become stronger, more unpredictable. I don't know why. He could hear the fear in her voice, and it made his heart ache. Is there anything I can do to help? He asked. She looked at him, her glowing eyes filled with surprise, and something else. Gratitude, maybe. You are kind to offer, she said. But this is my burden to bear. You should focus on healing. He wanted to argue, to insist that he could help, but he knew she was right. He was still weak, still recovering. But he made a silent promise to himself: once he was strong enough, he would do whatever he could to help her. Over the next few days, Nara continued to care for him. She brought him food, changed his bandages, and even helped him walk around the room as his strength returned. Slowly, he began to learn more about her and her world. Zorith was a beautiful planet, she told him. Its skies were a deep, shimmering purple, and its forests were filled with bioluminescent trees that glowed in the dark. The Zorathians were a peaceful people, living in harmony with nature. But they were also secretive, wary of outsiders. "Why did you save me?" he asked her one day. "If your people don't like outsiders, why bring me here?" She hesitated, then said, "Because it is our way. We do not turn away those in need. And, there was something about you. Something different." He didn't know what to say to that. But he felt a strange warmth in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. As the days passed, he grew stronger. But he also noticed that Nara seemed more on edge. Her glowing eyes would flicker occasionally, and she would sometimes pause mid-sentence, as if listening to something only she could hear. One night, as he lay in bed, he heard a strange sound coming from outside his room. It was a low, rhythmic humming, like the sound of a distant engine. Curious, he got up and walked to the door, which slid open silently. The hallway outside was dimly lit, the walls glowing faintly with the same golden light as the ceiling in his room. The humming grew louder as he followed it, his bare feet silent on the smooth floor. He turned a corner and saw something that made his breath catch in his throat. Nara was standing at the end of the hallway, her back to him. She was surrounded by a swirling cloud of light, like a miniature galaxy. Her body was glowing, her skin shimmering with the same golden light as the walls. "Nara," he called softly. She turned to him, and he saw that her eyes were glowing brighter than ever. But there was something else in them, something wild, untamed. "John," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You shouldn't be here." "What's happening?" he asked, taking a step closer. "The frenzy," she said, her voice barely audible. "It's coming back. I can't control it." And then, before he could react, she lunged at him. John barely had time to react as Nara lunged at him. Her glowing eyes were wild, her movements swift and unpredictable. He stumbled backward, his heart pounding in his chest. But instead of attacking him, she grabbed his arm and pulled him into a nearby room, slamming the door shut behind them. "Stay here," she said, her voice strained. "Don't come out, no matter what you hear." Before he could respond, she turned and left, locking the door behind her. John stood there, his mind racing. What was happening? Was she trying to protect him, or was she the danger? He pressed his ear against the door, listening intently. Outside, he could hear strange sounds, growls, hisses, and the occasional thud, as if something heavy had fallen. He wanted to open the door, to see what was going on, but he remembered Nara's warning and stayed put. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. Finally, the sounds outside died down, and the door slid open. Nara stood there, her breathing heavy, her glowing eyes dimmer than before. She looked exhausted, her shoulders slumped, and there was a faint scratch on her cheek. "What happened?" John asked, stepping closer. It's over," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For now." "What was that? Was it the frenzy again?" She nodded, avoiding his gaze. "It's getting worse. I don't know how much longer I can control it." John felt a pang of sympathy. He could see the fear in her eyes, the weight of her struggle. Without thinking, he reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to face this alone," he said softly. "Let me help you." She looked at him, her glowing eyes filled with surprise, and something else. Gratitude, maybe. "You don't understand," she said. "This is dangerous. If I lose control, I could hurt you, or worse." "I'm not afraid of you," he said firmly. "You saved my life. The least I can do is try to help you." For a moment, she just stared at him, as if trying to decide whether to believe him. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. Over the next few days, John and Nara grew closer. She showed him more of the medical facility, explaining how it worked and introducing him to some of the other Zorathians. They were a quiet, reserved people, but they seemed to accept John's presence, thanks to Nara's influence. One day, Nara took him outside for the first time. The sight took his breath away. The sky was a deep, shimmering purple, dotted with two suns that cast a warm, golden light over everything. The air was filled with the scent of exotic flowers, and in the distance, he could see towering trees that glowed faintly in the twilight. "It's beautiful," he said, staring in awe. "This is just a small part of Zorith," Nara said, smiling faintly. "There is much more to see." As they walked, John noticed that Nara seemed more relaxed than usual. Her glowing eyes were calm, and she even laughed at one of his jokes, a soft, melodic sound that made him smile. But their peaceful moment was short-lived. As they reached the edge of the forest, a low growl echoed through the trees. Nara froze, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the area. "What is it?" John asked, his voice tense. "A predator," she said, her voice low. "We need to go. Now." Before they could move, a creature emerged from the shadows. It was unlike anything John had ever seen, a massive, wolf-like beast with glowing red eyes and sharp, jagged teeth. It snarled, its gaze fixed on them. Nara stepped in front of John, her body tense. "Stay behind me," she said. The creature lunged at them, moving faster than John could have imagined. But Nara was faster. She dodged its attack, her movements fluid and precise. She grabbed a nearby branch and swung it at the creature, hitting it square in the head. The beast howled in pain but didn't back down. John's heart raced as he watched the fight. He wanted to help, but he knew he was no match for the creature. All he could do was stay out of the way. The battle didn't last long. With a final, powerful strike, Nara knocked the creature to the ground. It let out a weak whimper before limping away into the forest. Nara turned to John, her breathing heavy. "Are you okay?" she asked. He nodded, still in shock. You saved me again." She smiled faintly. "It's my job." But John could see the toll the fight had taken on her. Her glowing eyes flickered, and she swayed slightly on her feet. He reached out to steady her, his hand brushing against hers. For a moment, they just stood there, their eyes locked. "Thank you," he said softly. She nodded, her expression softening. "You're welcome." As they made their way back to the medical facility, John couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between them. They weren't just nurse and patient anymore. They were something more. And he knew, deep down, that he would do whatever it took to help her. That night, John couldn't sleep. His mind was racing, replaying the events of the day, the predator, the fight, the way Nara had looked at him afterward. There was something about her that fascinated him, something he couldn't quite put into words. But he also knew that she was hiding something big. He got up and walked to the window, staring out at the glowing forest. The two suns had set, and the sky was now a deep, velvety black, dotted with countless stars. It was beautiful, but it also felt alien, reminding him of how far he was from home. A soft knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. He turned to see Nara standing in the doorway, her glowing eyes dim in the darkness. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "Too much on my mind." She hesitated, then stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. I need to tell you something," she said, her voice trembling. John's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself. "You've been asking about the mating frenzy," she said. "About what it means, why it's happening to me. I think it's time you knew the truth." John nodded, his curiosity piqued. "I'm listening." She sat down on the edge of his bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "The mating frenzy is a rare biological phenomenon that affects my kind," she began. "It happens only once in a lifetime, when a Zorathian reaches a certain age. It's a time of great transformation, both physically and emotionally. But it's also dangerous." "Dangerous how?" John asked. "If not controlled, it can lead to madness," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Or worse. Some Zorathians don't survive it. And those who do, they're never the same." John felt a chill run down his spine. "Is there a way to stop it?" She shook her head. "Not stop it, exactly. But there are ways to manage it. Ancient rituals, passed down through generations. But lately, something has changed. The frenzy has become stronger, more unpredictable. I don't know why." John frowned. "What do you mean?" She looked away, her glowing eyes dimming. "In the past, the frenzy was a private matter. It happened quietly, without drawing attention. But now, it's different. It's like a storm, raging out of control. And I'm afraid of what might happen if I can't find a way to stop it." John reached out and placed a hand on hers. "You're not alone in this," he said firmly. "I'll help you, no matter what it takes." She looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude, and something else. "Fear, maybe." "You don't understand," she said. "The frenzy, it's not just a physical transformation. It's emotional, too. It creates a bond between the Zorathian and someone else. Someone they care about." John's eyes widened. "Are you saying?" She nodded, her voice barely audible. "Yes. The frenzy has chosen you." For a moment, John was speechless. He didn't know what to say, how to feel. Part of him was flattered, touched even. But another part was terrified. What did this mean for him? For her? "What happens now?" he asked finally. "I don't know," she admitted. "The bond is still forming. It's why I've been so drawn to you. But it's also why I've been so afraid. If the frenzy takes over, I could hurt you. I could lose control." John squeezed her hand. "You won't," he said firmly. "I trust you." She looked at him, her glowing eyes filled with emotion. "You shouldn't," she whispered. "But, thank you." They sat there in silence for a while, the weight of her words hanging in the air. John's mind was racing, trying to process everything she had told him. But one thing was clear, he couldn't just stand by and watch her suffer. He had to do something. "Is there a way to break the bond?" he asked finally. She shook her head. "Not easily. The bond is tied to the frenzy. The only way to break it is to end the frenzy itself." "And how do we do that?" She hesitated, then said, "There is a place, an ancient temple, hidden deep in the forest. It's said to hold the key to controlling the frenzy. But it's dangerous. No one who has gone there has ever returned." John's heart sank. But he knew what he had to do. "Then we'll go together," he said firmly. "We'll find a way to control the frenzy. I won't let you face this alone." She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. You don't know what you're saying, she said. It's too dangerous. Maybe, he said. But I'm not afraid. Not if it means saving you. For a moment, she just stared at him, as if trying to decide whether to believe him. Then, slowly, she nodded. Thank you, she whispered. John smiled faintly. You're welcome. As they sat there, the bond between them growing stronger, John couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was just beginning. And he knew, deep down, that it would change both of them forever. The next morning, John and Nara began preparing for their journey. The medical facility was quiet, most of the Zorathians still asleep. Nara led John to a storage room filled with supplies, food, water, and strange, glowing devices that John didn't recognize. We'll need these, Nara said, handing him a small, crystal-like object. They're called lumina stones. They provide light and warmth, and they can also be used to purify water. John nodded, slipping the stone into his pocket. What else do we need? Weapons, Nara said, her voice grim. The forest is dangerous, especially at night. We'll need to be prepared. She handed him a sleek, metallic rod. At first glance, it looked harmless, but when Nara pressed a button on the side, it extended into a long, glowing staff. This is a Zorathian energy staff, she explained. It's lightweight but powerful. Just aim and strike. John tested the staff, swinging it gently through the air. It felt natural in his hands, like an extension of his arm. This is amazing, he said. Thank you. Nara nodded, her expression serious. We'll need to move quickly and quietly. The temple is deep in the forest, and the journey won't be easy. I'm ready, John said firmly. Let's go. They left the medical facility just as the first sun was rising, casting a golden glow over the landscape. The forest was even more beautiful up close, the bioluminescent trees glowing faintly in the early morning light. But John knew better than to let his guard down. The beauty of Zorath hid dangers he couldn't even imagine. As they walked, Nara explained more about the temple. It's called the Temple of Lumina, she said. It's said to be the birthplace of our species, a place of great power. But it's also a place of great danger. The temple is guarded by ancient traps and creatures that have lived there for centuries. Sounds like a fun trip, John said, trying to lighten the mood. Nara smiled faintly. It won't be easy. But if we can reach the inner chamber, we might find a way to control the frenzy. John nodded, his determination growing. He would do whatever it took to help Nara, no matter the risks. The first few hours of their journey were uneventful. The forest was peaceful, the only sounds the rustling of leaves and the occasional chirp of an alien bird. But as the day wore on, the atmosphere began to change. The trees grew thicker, their glowing leaves casting eerie shadows on the ground. The air felt heavier, charged with an energy that made John's skin tingle. We're getting close, Nara said, her voice low. Stay alert. John gripped his energy staff tightly, his eyes scanning the surroundings. He could feel the tension in the air, the sense that something was watching them. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the trees. John froze, his heart pounding. What was that? He whispered. Nara's glowing eyes narrowed. Predator, she said. Get ready. Before John could respond, a creature emerged from the shadows. It was smaller than the one they had encountered before, but no less dangerous. Its glowing red eyes locked onto them, and it let out a menacing snarl. Nara stepped forward, her energy staff at the ready. Stay behind me, she said. But John wasn't about to let her face the creature alone. He moved to her side, his staff glowing faintly in his hands. We're in this together, he said. The creature lunged at them, moving faster than John could have imagined. But Nara was ready. She swung her staff, striking the creature in the side. It howled in pain but didn't back down. John took a deep breath and charged forward, swinging his staff with all his might. The creature dodged his attack, but Nara was there to strike again. Together, they fought the creature, their movements synchronized, as if they had been fighting side by side for years. Finally, with a powerful strike from Nara, the creature let out a weak whimper and limped away into the forest. John let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. "That was close," he said, his voice shaky. Nara nodded, her glowing eyes filled with relief. "You did well," she said. "But we need to keep moving. We're not safe yet." They continued their journey, the forest growing darker and more ominous with every step. John could feel the weight of the temple's presence, the sense that they were being drawn towards something ancient and powerful. As they walked, Nara suddenly stopped, her eyes widening. "Do you feel that?" she asked. John frowned. "Feel what?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and ran toward a nearby clearing. John followed, his heart racing. When he reached the clearing, he saw what had caught her attention. There, in the center of the clearing, was a massive stone archway, covered in glowing symbols. Beyond it, he could see the outline of a towering structure, its surface shimmering with the same golden light as the medical facility. "The Temple of Lumina," Nara whispered, her voice filled with awe. John stared at the temple, a mixture of fear and excitement coursing through him. They had made it this far, but he knew the hardest part was yet to come. "Let's go," he said, gripping his staff tightly. "We've got a frenzy to control." The Temple of Lumina loomed before them, its towering structure glowing faintly in the dim light of the forest. The air around it felt heavy, charged with an ancient energy that made John's skin prickle. He glanced at Nara, her glowing eyes fixed on the temple with a mixture of awe and fear. "This is it," she said softly. "The heart of Zorith." John nodded, gripping his energy staff tightly. "What do we do now?" "We go inside," Nara said. "But be careful. The temple is filled with traps and guardians. One wrong step, and we could be in serious trouble." They approached the stone archway, the glowing symbols pulsing faintly as if alive. As they stepped through, John felt a strange sensation, like a wave of energy passing through him. The air inside the temple was cool and still, the silence almost deafening. The interior of the temple was even more breathtaking than the outside. The walls were covered in intricate carvings, depicting scenes of Zorathian history, great battles, ancient rituals, and the birth of their species. The floor was made of smooth, polished stone, reflecting the golden light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "This way," Nara said, leading him down a narrow corridor. "The inner chamber is at the center of the temple." As they walked, John couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The air grew heavier with every step, and the faint hum of energy grew louder. He glanced at Nara, her glowing eyes focused ahead, her expression tense. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shifted. John barely had time to react as a section of the floor slid open, revealing a deep pit filled with sharp, glowing spikes. "Jump!" Nara shouted, grabbing his arm and pulling him forward. They landed on the other side, just barely avoiding the trap. John's heart was pounding, his hands trembling as he gripped his staff. "That was close," he said, his voice shaky. Nara nodded, her glowing eyes scanning the corridor. "Stay close to me," she said. "The temple is designed to test those who enter. We need to be careful." They continued their journey, navigating through a series of traps, swinging blades, collapsing floors, and walls that closed in on them. Each time, Nara's quick thinking and knowledge of the temple saved them, but John could see the toll it was taking on her. Her glowing eyes flickered occasionally, and she seemed more on edge than ever. Finally, they reached the inner chamber. The room was circular, its walls covered in glowing symbols that pulsed in rhythm with the energy in the air. In the center of the room was a pedestal, on top of which rested a large, glowing crystal. The heart of Lumina, Nara whispered, her voice filled with reverence. It's the source of our power, and the key to controlling the frenzy. John stepped forward, staring at the crystal in awe. What do we do with it? Nara hesitated, her glowing eyes filled with uncertainty. I'm not sure. The rituals to control the frenzy were lost long ago. But if we can connect with the crystal, it might show us the way. Before John could respond, a low growl echoed through the chamber. He turned to see a massive creature emerging from the shadows, a guardian of the temple, its glowing red eyes fixed on them. Stay back! Nara shouted, stepping in front of John. The creature lunged at them, moving faster than John could have imagined. Nara met its attack head-on, her energy staff glowing brightly as she struck at the creature. But it was strong, its thick hide deflecting most of her blows. John wanted to help, but he knew he was no match for the creature. All he could do was watch as Nara fought with everything she had. The battle was fierce, the creature's claws slashing through the air as Nara dodged and struck with precision. But John could see that she was tiring, her movements slowing as the creature pressed its attack. Finally, with a powerful strike, Nara knocked the creature to the ground. It let out a weak whimper before collapsing, its body dissolving into a cloud of glowing particles. Nara turned to John, her breathing heavy. We need to hurry, she said. The temple's guardians won't stop coming. John nodded, his heart racing. What do we do? Nara stepped up to the pedestal, her glowing eyes fixed on the crystal. I need to connect with it, she said. But it's dangerous. If I lose control. You won't, John said firmly. I believe in you. She looked at him, her eyes filled with emotion. Thank you, she whispered. Nara placed her hands on the crystal, her glowing eyes closing as she focused. The room filled with a bright, golden light, the energy in the air growing stronger. John could feel the power of the crystal, its energy pulsing through the room like a heartbeat. But then, something went wrong. Nara's body stiffened, her glowing eyes flickering wildly. She let out a strangled cry, her hands gripping the crystal tightly. Nara! John shouted, stepping forward. Stay back, she cried, her voice trembling. The frenzy, it's too strong. I can't control it. John's heart sank as he watched her struggle. He wanted to help, but he didn't know how. The energy in the room grew more intense, the walls shaking as the temple reacted to Nara's turmoil. Finally, with a desperate cry, Nara pulled her hands away from the crystal. The energy in the room subsided, and she collapsed to the floor, her body trembling. John rushed to her side, his heart pounding. Nara, are you okay? She looked up at him, her glowing eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, she whispered. I can't do it. The frenzy is too strong. If I stay here, I'll only put you in danger. What are you saying? John asked, his voice trembling. Nara reached up, her hand brushing against his cheek. You need to leave, she said. Take the crystal and go. Find a way to control the frenzy. But don't come back for me. John shook his head, his eyes filling with tears. No. I'm not leaving you. You have to, she said, her voice firm. It's the only way. Before John could respond, the ground beneath them began to shake. The temple's guardians were coming, drawn by the energy of the crystal. Nara pushed him away, her glowing eyes filled with determination. Go, she shouted. Now. John hesitated, his heart breaking. But he knew she was right. If he stayed, they would both die. He grabbed the crystal, its energy pulsing in his hands, and ran toward the exit. As he reached the archway, he turned back to see Nara standing in the center of the chamber, her glowing eyes fixed on him. Thank you, she whispered. And then, the temple collapsed around her. John ran through the forest, the heart of Lumina clutched tightly in his hands. His heart was pounding, his mind racing with fear and guilt. He couldn't believe what had just happened. Nara was gone, buried under the rubble of the temple. And it was all his fault. But he couldn't think about that now. He had to focus. Nara had given him the crystal for a reason. She believed he could find a way to control the frenzy, to save her and her people. He couldn't let her down. The forest was eerily quiet, the usual sounds of alien birds and rustling leaves replaced by an oppressive silence. John's footsteps echoed loudly as he ran, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he had to keep moving. Finally, he reached a small clearing. The two suns were setting, casting a golden glow over the landscape. John collapsed to his knees, his body trembling with exhaustion. He stared at the crystal in his hands, its golden light pulsing faintly. "What do I do now?" he whispered, his voice breaking. As if in response, the crystal began to glow brighter. John felt a strange warmth spreading through his hands, a gentle energy that seemed to calm his racing thoughts. He closed his eyes, focusing on the crystal's light. Suddenly, images began to flash in his mind, scenes of Zorathian history, ancient rituals, and the birth of their species. He saw Nara, her glowing eyes filled with determination, and he felt a surge of hope. The crystal was showing him the way. John opened his eyes, his heart pounding with newfound determination. He knew what he had to do. The crystal had revealed the location of an ancient Zorathian sanctuary, a place where the rituals to control the frenzy were once performed. If he could reach it, he might be able to save Nara. He got to his feet, his exhaustion replaced by a fierce resolve. "I'm coming, Nara," he whispered. "Hold on." The journey to the sanctuary was long and arduous. The forest grew darker and more treacherous with every step, the air thick with the scent of decay. John could feel the weight of the crystal in his hands, its energy guiding him forward. As he walked, he began to notice strange markings on the trees, glowing symbols similar to the ones in the temple. They seemed to be leading him somewhere, guiding him toward the sanctuary. Finally, after what felt like hours, he reached a small, hidden cave. The entrance was covered in glowing symbols, their light pulsing in rhythm with the crystal. John stepped inside, his heart racing. The cave was small but filled with an ancient energy. The walls were covered in carvings, depicting scenes of Zorathian rituals, Zorathians standing in a circle, their glowing eyes focused on a central figure holding a crystal. John realized with a start that the crystal was the heart of Lumina. "This is it," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. He placed the crystal on a small pedestal in the center of the cave, its light filling the room. The carvings on the walls began to glow, their light merging with the crystal's energy. John felt a surge of power, a connection to something ancient and powerful. He closed his eyes, focusing on the crystal's light. He thought of Nara, her glowing eyes, her kindness, her strength. He thought of the bond they had formed, the connection that had grown between them. And then, he felt it, a surge of energy, a connection to the crystal. It was as if the crystal was speaking to him, guiding him through the ritual. John began to chant, the words coming to him as if from a distant memory. The energy in the room grew stronger, the light from the crystal and the carvings merging into a single, blinding glow. Finally, with a final, powerful surge of energy, the ritual was complete. The light subsided, and John opened his eyes, his heart pounding. He had done it. He had found the cure. But there was no time to celebrate. He grabbed the crystal and ran out of the cave, his heart filled with hope. He had to get back to the temple, back to Nara. The journey back was a blur. John ran through the forest, his mind focused on one thing, saving Nara. He didn't stop, didn't rest. He couldn't. Finally, he reached the temple. The rubble was still there, the entrance buried under tons of stone. But John didn't care. He began to dig, his hands bleeding as he moved the heavy stones. "Nara," he shouted, his voice hoarse. "I'm here. Hold on." He didn't know how long he dug, but finally, he reached the inner chamber. The room was in ruins, the walls cracked and crumbling. But in the center of the room, lying amidst the rubble, was Nara. She was unconscious, her body covered in dust and debris. But she was alive. John rushed to her side, his heart pounding. "Nara," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I'm here. I found the cure." He placed the crystal on her chest, its light pulsing faintly. The energy from the crystal spread through her body, her glowing eyes flickering as the ritual took effect. Slowly, Nara opened her eyes. She looked up at John, her expression filled with surprise and gratitude. You came back," she whispered. John smiled faintly, tears streaming down his face. "I told you I wouldn't leave you." Nara reached up, her hand brushing against his cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. For a moment, they just sat there, their bond stronger than ever. John knew that their journey wasn't over, that there were still challenges ahead. But for now, they were together, and that was all that mattered. Nara's strength slowly returned as the energy from the heart of Lumina flowed through her. She sat up, her glowing eyes fixed on John, filled with gratitude and something deeper, something unspoken. The bond between them had grown stronger, and John could feel it, a connection that went beyond words. "You saved me," Nara said softly, her voice trembling. "But the frenzy, it's not over. It's stronger now, more intense. I can feel it." John nodded, his expression serious. "We'll face it together. The crystal showed me the way. We just need to complete the ritual." Nara hesitated, her glowing eyes flickering with fear. "The final stage of the frenzy is the most dangerous. If we fail, it could destroy us both." John reached out and took her hand, his grip firm. "We won't fail. I believe in you. And I believe in us." Nara looked at him, her eyes filled with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered. They left the temple ruins, the heart of Lumina glowing brightly in John's hands. The forest was eerily quiet, as if holding its breath. The air was thick with tension, the energy of the frenzy growing stronger with every step. Nara led John to a secluded grove, a place she said was sacred to her people. The trees here were taller, their glowing leaves casting a soft, golden light over the clearing. In the center of the grove was a small pool of water, its surface shimmering with the same golden light. "This is where we complete the ritual," Nara said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "The pool is connected to the heart of Lumina. It will amplify its power." John placed the crystal on the edge of the pool, its light reflecting off the water. The energy in the air grew stronger, the ground beneath them vibrating faintly. "What do we do now?" John asked. Nara took a deep breath, her glowing eyes fixed on the crystal. "We need to merge our energies with the crystal. It will guide us through the final stage of the frenzy. But, it will be painful. And dangerous." John nodded, his determination unwavering. "I'm ready." They knelt by the pool, their hands resting on the crystal. Nara closed her eyes, her glowing skin pulsing faintly. John followed her lead, focusing on the crystal's light. At first, nothing happened. But then, John felt a surge of energy, a connection to the crystal and to Nara. The light from the crystal grew brighter, filling the grove with a blinding glow. The frenzy began. Nara's body stiffened, her glowing eyes flickering wildly. She let out a strangled cry, her hands gripping the crystal tightly. John could feel the energy coursing through her, intense and uncontrollable. "Nara," he shouted, his voice filled with panic. "Hold on." But Nara couldn't respond. The frenzy had taken over, her body convulsing as the energy surged through her. John could feel it too, the power of the frenzy threatening to overwhelm him. He focused on the crystal, on the bond they had formed. He thought of Nara, of her strength, her kindness, her determination. He thought of the journey they had been through, the sacrifices they had made. And then, he let go. The energy from the crystal surged through him, merging with the frenzy. The pain was intense, like fire coursing through his veins. But he didn't fight it. He embraced it, letting it flow through him and into Nara. For a moment, everything was chaos. The light from the crystal grew brighter, the ground shaking violently. John felt like he was being torn apart, his mind and body pushed to their limits. But then, suddenly, it stopped. The light subsided, the energy fading away. John opened his eyes, his body trembling with exhaustion. Nara was lying beside him, her glowing eyes closed, her breathing slow and steady. "Nara," he whispered, his voice trembling. She opened her eyes, her glowing gaze filled with relief and gratitude. "It's over," she said softly. "The frenzy, it's gone." John felt a surge of emotion, tears streaming down his face. "You're okay," he said, his voice breaking. "You're okay." Nara reached up, her hand brushing against his cheek. "We did it," she whispered. "Together." For a moment, they just sat there, their bond stronger than ever. The grove was peaceful now, the golden light of the trees casting a warm glow over them. But John knew their journey wasn't over. There were still challenges ahead, questions to be answered. But for now, they had won. They had faced the frenzy and come out stronger. "What happens now?" John asked, his voice soft. Nara smiled faintly. "Now, we live." The days that followed were peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos they had endured. John and Nara stayed in the grove for a while, allowing themselves time to recover and reflect. The heart of Lumina, now dim and quiet, rested by the pool, its purpose fulfilled. The bond between them remained, stronger than ever, a silent reminder of all they had been through. One evening, as the twin suns dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and purple, John and Nara sat by the pool. The air was warm, filled with the soft hum of the forest. John broke the silence first. "What now?" he asked, his voice gentle. "Where do we go from here?" Nara looked at him, her glowing eyes soft and thoughtful. "For the first time in my life, I feel free. The frenzy is gone, and with it, the fear that controlled me. But I know my people still need me. They need to know what we've discovered, that there's hope for them too." John nodded. "And I'll be there with you. We're in this together, remember?" Nara smiled, a genuine warmth in her expression. "I wouldn't have it any other way." They returned to the Zorathian settlement the next day. The medical facility was bustling with activity, but the moment Nara and John stepped inside, everything seemed to stop. The Zorathians stared at them, their glowing eyes filled with curiosity and awe. Nara stepped forward, her voice steady and strong. "My people," she began, "I bring you hope. The frenzy is not a curse, it is a challenge, one we can overcome. With the power of the heart of Lumina and the strength of our bonds, we can control it. We can live without fear." The Zorathians murmured among themselves, their expressions shifting from doubt to hope. John stood by Nara's side, his presence a silent testament to the bond they had formed, a bond that had saved them both. Over the next few weeks, Nara and John worked together to share what they had learned. They taught the Zorathians the rituals, the importance of connection, and the power of the heart of Lumina. Slowly but surely, the atmosphere in the settlement began to change. The fear that had once gripped the Zorathians was replaced by hope, a sense of unity and purpose. One night, as they stood on a hill overlooking the settlement, John turned to Nara. "You've given them something incredible," he said. "A chance to live without fear." Nara looked at him, her glowing eyes filled with emotion. "We did it together," she said. "I couldn't have done it without you." John smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "I think I've found my place here," he said. "With you. With your people. This feels like home." Nara reached out, her hand brushing against his. "It is home," she said softly. "And you belong here, with me." As they stood there, watching the glowing lights of the settlement below, John realized how far they had come. From a chance encounter in a medical facility to facing the frenzy together, their journey had been one of fear, sacrifice, and ultimately, love. "What do you think the future holds?" John asked, his voice quiet. Nara smiled, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "A new beginning," she said. "For all of us." John nodded, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. "I like the sound of that." And as the twin suns rose the next morning, casting their golden light over the land, John and Nara stepped forward into their new life, a life filled with hope, connection, and the promise of a brighter future. Life lesson. The story ends with a powerful lesson: true strength comes from connection and sacrifice. John and Nara's journey shows that even in the face of overwhelming challenges, love and unity can overcome fear. Their bond, forged through trials and trust, becomes a beacon of hope not just for themselves, but for an entire people. It reminds us that we are stronger together, and that every ending is the start of a new beginning.